After World War II, Ukraine faced devastation, but Stalin's repression continued, targeting Ukrainian nationalists like the UPA through mass arrests and executions. After Stalin's death, Khrushchev's reforms offered limited relief, including the transfer of Crimea to Ukraine in 1954. Under Brezhnev, repression returned, with dissidents like Vasyl, Stus and Vyacheslav Chornovil facing imprisonment. The 1986 Chernobyl disaster further eroded trust in Soviet rule. Gorbachev's reforms in the late 1980s fueled Ukrainian nationalism, leading to mass protests and demands for independence. Finally, in 1991, Ukraine declared independence, with 92% voting in favor, marking the beginning of a new era. Let's travel to the history. After World War II, Ukraine was in ruins. Cities like Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Lviv had been heavily bombed, and millions of Ukrainians had died. But for Stalin, the real war wasn't over yet. He saw Ukraine as a region full of potential enemies and launched new waves of repression. The Ukrainian Insurgent Army, UPA, which had fought against both Nazis and Soviets, continued a guerrilla war against Soviet forces in the forests of western Ukraine. Stalin responded with mass arrests, executions, and deportations. Anyone suspected of supporting Ukrainian nationalism was sent to Siberia. The Soviet secret police, NKVD, hunted down UPA fighters, executing them or sending them to labor camps. By 1953, Stalin was dead, but his policies had devastated Ukraine. The dream of independence seemed further away than ever. After Stalin's death, Nikita Khrushchev became the new Soviet leader and introduced some reforms. He denounced Stalin's crimes and released thousands of political prisoners. But Ukraine was still firmly under Soviet control. In 1954, Khrushchev made a historic decision. He transferred Crimea from Russia to Ukraine as a symbolic gesture to celebrate 300 years of unity between Ukraine and Russia. At the time, this seemed like a minor administrative change, but decades later, it would become one of the most contested political issues in the region. Under Khrushchev, Ukraine became one of the most industrialized regions of the USSR. New factories, power plants, and steel mills were built. Ukrainian cities grew rapidly, with millions moving to Kyiv, Dnipro, and Donetsk. But despite Ukraine's economic importance, Moscow controlled everything. Resources, policies, and political decisions were all made in the Soviet capital. In the 1960s and 1970s, a new generation of Ukrainians began to resist Soviet control. Writers, poets, and activists secretly spread Ukrainian literature and history, defying Soviet censorship. Key figures included Vyacheslav Chornovil, a journalist and political activist who fought for Ukrainian rights, Vasyl Stus, a poet who was arrested for his pro-Ukrainian views and died in a Soviet prison, Ivan Juba, a scholar who wrote Internationalism or Russification, criticizing Soviet policies. The Soviet response was brutal. Dissidents were arrested, imprisoned, or exiled. Ukrainian culture was suppressed, with books and music banned. The KGB, Soviet secret police, kept constant watch on anyone suspected of nationalist ideas. Despite the repression, the flame of Ukrainian nationalism never died. On April 26, 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in northern Ukraine exploded, causing the worst nuclear disaster in history. Radiation spread across Ukraine, Belarus, and Europe. The Soviet government tried to cover up the disaster, delaying evacuation and hiding the truth from the world. Thousands of people were exposed to deadly radiation, leading to cancer, birth defects, and long-term health problems. The Chernobyl disaster shattered trust in the Soviet government. Many Ukrainians saw it as proof that Moscow did not care about Ukraine, and the desire for independence grew stronger. In the late 1980s, Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev introduced glasnost, openness, and perestroika, reform, to save the collapsing Soviet system, but instead of strengthening the USSR. These policies gave Ukrainians the freedom to speak out. The Ukrainian People's Movement, RUK, was formed, demanding more autonomy. Mass protests erupted in Kyiv and other cities. The Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, banned for decades, re-emerged, showing the revival of Ukrainian identity. By 1991, the Soviet Union was falling apart. On August 24, 1991, the Ukrainian parliament declared Ukraine an independent nation. On December 1, 1991, 92% of Ukrainians voted for independence in a national referendum. Even Crimea and eastern Ukraine, historically Russian-speaking regions, voted overwhelmingly for an independent Ukraine. After centuries of foreign rule, oppression, and resistance, Ukraine was finally free, but independence was just the beginning of a new struggle. Ukraine now had to build a new nation from scratch, facing political, economic, and geopolitical challenges that would shape its future.